Yo, so guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to how do the East Coast and West Coast compare the USA by general knowledge. I don't know if you reactions to the channel before. And yeah, I just saw this pop up. I'm struggling for reactions at the moment, so I just saw this pop up and it was what interested me most from what I've been scrolling and looking at. But yeah, if you've got any suggestions, let me know because I want to do some just any types of reactions, literally any types of suggestions. Just put them in the comments and I'll give them a try. But yeah, we're gonna jump into this video. Links are in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some more videos of mine and you want to suggest me some videos to watch. Maybe I can't post them onto YouTube, but the Patreon is where I'd post them. So yeah, links are in the description for that. But let's jump into this and see the comparisons. I don't know what sort of things are going to be compared. Maybe just everything in general, like political views, maybe like ways of life, the weather, just literally anything you can think of to compare is probably going to be that. But yeah, let's jump into this video.
East versus West. A while back, I did a video comparing the two sides of Germany. Even though the country were united in the late 20th century, many factors still point out deep differences between the two sides of the country. This got me thinking, which other countries have big differences between regions? In this video, we're going to be comparing two regions of the United States, the East versus the West coasts. First, it's important to point out that the two coasts are, together, the most developed and rich regions of the country. When you compare each or the two together with the country's interior, the numbers speak for themselves. The biggest example is population, with the vast majority living in these areas. But comparing the coasts with the interior would be a little
to be
boring
fair,
because
I feel like coastal areas are like where most people live in the world anyway. There's an opportunity to live on the coast. Isn't that where most of the time people will live? Maybe it's just with the US, because with England, it's not actually like that at all. Because London's not a coastal city. Birmingham isn't. Manchester isn't. Actually, maybe not. Maybe I'm talking up my arse then. Barcelona is a coastal city. Madrid is definitely not. Yeah, actually, maybe I'm just chatting out my ass. I think I might be because all the major cities in the US are on the coast, but that just might be because that's where people, when they first came to the US, that's where they settled, you know?
the coasts would do better in pretty much all factors. So I want to take into account the two of them and answer the question, how do the East and West coasts of the US compare? The first differences we should take into account are, I think, geographical and territorial ones. As the name indicates, the West Coast is in the west and the East is in the east. The East Coast borders the Atlantic Ocean and Canada, while the West borders the Pacific Ocean, Canada, but also Mexico. Being 3 hours ahead, the East Coast technically has 14 states, very closely related to the initial 13 colonies that rebelled against the British and first established the United States. One exception, among others, being Florida, which was still Spanish at the time. For this video, I chose to include Pennsylvania and Vermont, making the total of the East Coast 16. I know they're not on the East Coast itself, but it makes sense to me to include them on this list. While the West Coast only has 3 states, some people include Nevada and Arizona in their West Coast concept, but I didn't in this video, and the official West Coast is also made up of Alaska and Hawaii, which I equally didn't include. Interestingly, all of Florida is further south than California. I don't think we can really get this perception when looking at maps. When it comes to size and population, the size of the East Coast is over 1 million square kilometers, made up of the states of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut,
so a lot more,
New York,
a lot bigger.
Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And its population is around 130 million, almost 40% of the United States total population. The West Coast size is smaller at 863,000 square kilometers. Now, it is smaller, but not that much smaller, which means that these 3 states are much bigger than many of the other 16. And its population is around 50 million, less than half, almost only 1/3 of the East Coast's, only 15% of the country's total. It's interesting that the sizes aren't that different, with the East only being slightly bigger, but much more populated, showing us how population density in the East is much higher than the West.
And then you consider the fact that the majority of the people in this place are from one city or like 2-3 cities dotted around. So yeah, it's definitely a lot less densely
much higher
populated.
than the West. This map of population density demonstrates that there's a lot more green areas in the West. The whole eastern area of the country is much more populated even. There's only a few urban areas in the middle and west of the country on almost a single strip of high density land in the west coast. This likely has to do with the fact that the east was colonized first, and expansion moved in the direction of east to west. First the 13 colonies, then the territory ceded by the British, then the Louisiana Purchase, and then the Mexican cessions. This also justifies another difference between the coasts, which is the existence of older cities and structures. Universities, for instance, are much older in the East Coast, with some dating to the 18th century. California is the only US state in the West that was settled earlier than the rest, but still later than the whole of the East. When it comes to temperature, it varies somewhat equally as you go north and south of each of the coasts. The north is colder and the south is warmer. However, even if temperatures are similar, the weather types are different. In this map, we can see the Köppen climate types in each region. The Köppen climate classification is one of the most widely used systems, first published by German-Russian climatologist Vladimir Köppen in 1884. It divides climates into 5 main climate groups, with each group being divided based on seasonal precipitation and temperature patterns. Here we can see California is mostly Mediterranean type weather, Oregon is the same but less warm, while Washington is more oceanic. In the East Coast, the north is warm humid continental, with the rest being closer to subtropical, although these colors are a little confusing. Before we move on with the video, a quick message from today's
Getting his money, you love to see it. I'll skip that, but he's getting his money, and yeah, he deserves it, man.
We've looked at climate, weather, land, territory, organization, and population. So now, how do these people live in those areas? Politically, people on both coasts tend to be more progressive than the interior areas of the country. However, as you go further south in each of them, more conservatism also shows up. The states on the northeast coast are, in my opinion, some of the most progressive in the US, but California itself is as well. The whole of the West Coast has Democratic governors, which are also common in the Northeast, while the majority of the East Coast has Republicans as governors, results that are similar in other types of elections. Economically, the West is more of a center for technological companies and new startups, while the East is more the financial center of the country, especially up north. The unemployment rate is something that changes all the time, but right now it seems pretty balanced between the two coasts. Regarding the GDP, in this map made by friend and partner of the channel, Statista, we can see the contribution each state makes, percentage-wise, for the national GDP. We can instantly tell that the East Coast has a higher GDP percentage than the West. Again, 14-something states versus 3 is normal to be the
And California makes up the majority of the west side as well.
case. But we must pay attention to California, with the GDP almost equivalent to the whole country of the United Kingdom, being the highest in the country and contributing
Mad.
14% to the national value over New York and Florida combined. When it comes to HDI, the northeast coast is the
Where does the money even come from California? I'm thinking Hollywood. Is that just where so much of it comes? You got Silicon Valley, you got like all these company sort of places. Just a lot of companies set up in California. But like, to be nearly equal with the United Kingdom is pretty mental to me, because the United Kingdom is a pretty well-off country, and this just puts it to absolute shame.
most developed of the entire country, while all the west coast does pretty well too. The
I know.
south-
I mean, the United Kingdom is a really well developed. Did I say like? Yeah, no, it is. Like, it's one of the most well-developed countries in the world. You like, I live here. There's no problems for anything. But then you see that, and it's just kind of mental to me, and I don't know how. Because like, we've got our own sort of. Well, yeah, we've got our own film stuff going on here. Like, there's a lot of big sort of films that come from here, or TV series and stuff. But then, so that obviously means California. Surely it isn't based on Hollywood at all. It's going to be so many other things, but I just don't know what. Maybe just natural resources and stuff. Maybe I don't
which
know.
also reaches into the East Coast, is the area that does less well. Regarding salary, median monthly earnings are like this. The same thing happens. The North has a higher median income than the South in both coasts. The southern part of the East Coast is the one with the lowest income. This is per household and not individual, by the way. But making a lot of money doesn't mean that much if the cost of living is immense. Salaries in New York might be higher, but so is the cost to rent an apartment. This map shows us the average cost of living, and in it we can see that in all of the West Coast plus the Northeast Coast, the cost of living is over 100, which I think means on average it takes more to
Texas is a lot cheaper than I thought. I thought Texas would be a lot more expensive. Because there's a lot of major cities here, and a lot of cities that people want to go to, I feel like, want to live in and stuff.
Than you can earn every month. But besides all these economic indicators, it's also important to take a look at the income inequality. Maybe there's a lot of money being made, but most of it is concentrated on a very small minority of the population. This map shows us that information. The Gini index is only reasonable in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. None of the West Coast is in the green either, with only Washington being okay in the yellow. Back in the East Coast, New York, Connecticut are the worst, along with Washington, D.C. When it comes to the population's characteristics, this map shows us the counties where non-Caucasian people have a high percentage of the population. Both coasts have a high population of Caucasians. Some locations where people of Asian descent are more common, although there are a lot more of these in the East than the West, but the real difference is in the South. In California, there is a high presence of people of Latino or Hispanic descent, something that is only common in South Florida, while the remainder of the southern East Coast has a high prevalence of African American people as well. This other map, focused on metropolitan areas, shows us how there are many more in the East compared to the West. Regarding religion, there are a lot of non-Hispanic Catholics in the Northeast, but also across all the West Coast. Hispanic Catholics are very present in South California as well. African American Protestants are almost exclusive to the southern East Coast, while non-Hispanic Protestants are pretty much overwhelmingly the majority across the East Coast, but also very present in Oregon and Washington. In this type of videos, we usually compare army sizes. Obviously, we can't do that here. With regions of the same country, they have the same army. But we can look at how many people are enlisted per state. In this map, that becomes evident. The East Coast clearly has more enlisted personnel than the West, which
God damn, a lot of people around here, this area.
makes sense because they have more population. A lot of these maps end up showing us the whole of the US states, but I try to focus on the comparison between the ones on the two coasts, since that's what this video is about. So, that is how the East and West coasts of the United States
They compared pretty much everything you can compare.
in a few topics. Geographically, territorially, but also in other indicators like population, development, cost of living, GDP, among many others that shows us all the aspects in which the two sets of states differ.
Damn. So that went in depth to a lot of things. This video could have easily been renamed California versus the East without changing much. Yeah, this is a interesting one. She went She went into a lot of just random things, but it's just cool to sort of analyze those kinds of differences, you know. But hopefully you enjoyed this reaction, and yeah, until next time, like, subscribe, and peace.